Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, September 30th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the Pennsylvania Senate race between John Fetterman and Dr. Oz as it narrows up as we head towards the 2022 midterm elections. Now, the Pennsylvania Senate race is a race that has been long watched largely because there is a Republican incumbent named Senator Pat Toomey. He's been in office for quite some time now and chose to retire in 2019 ahead of what was expected to be this hotly contentious Senate race. Pennsylvania is a state that voted for Donald Trump in 2016, but then voted for President Biden back in 2020. Both presidents had been able to win in different regions of the state and been able to change the political climate of it depending on the election year. In 2018, the Democratic Party had major victories across the state in the governorship and the Senate election that coincided with those midterm elections. Democrats were doing well in Pennsylvania, but then 2020 showed them that the state absolutely is still competitive and is by no means a Democratic lock. Even though Democrats did flip the seat, it was still a very competitive race. And in the tune of quite literally everything Pennsylvania, this race has again become competitive to a point where now John Fetterman only leads Dr. Oz by a margin of about 4 points. Now, when I say only, I say it in the regard that John Fetterman led by significantly more prior to. What do I mean by that? Well, when you take a look at the election data from the months of July and August, John Fetterman at different points in time maintained a double-digit lead or a significantly high single-digit lead over Dr. Oz. And when you take a look at the 538 ballot, you can see that again, at different points, there were times where John Fetterman maintained a 12-point lead over Dr. Oz as we were further out from the election. But as I had been saying consistently, time and time again, this race was inevitably going to be close, and it has fulfilled that prophecy to a T today. Right now, according to 538, John Fetterman leads Dr. Oz by 6.5%, a significant lead, I would say. In fact, that should be 6% now. A significant lead for John Fetterman in a state that previously was his, that is currently held by a Republican, but at the same time, it is a reduction in terms of overall support for the Democratic nominee. Dr. Oz was not the Republican Party's first choice. The Republican Party's first choice was Sean Parnell, someone who came out of a House election who almost ousted Representative Connor Lamb, who had won his district in 2018 by over 15 points. Fast forward to 2020, almost lost, only won by about 2 to 3 points across the same congressional district. That Republican, Sean Parnell, was meant to be this awe-inspiring Republican who was endorsed by President Trump in April of 2021, received the endorsement very early on, and no Republicans really considered entering into the race because they knew that the Trump candidate was here. Then Sean Parnell dropped out of the race, a lot of drama ensued, and many candidates entered into the race, most notably Kathy Barnett, Dave McCormick, and Mehmet Oz. The same Mehmet Oz that is the TV personality better known as Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz won his primary very narrowly by about 1,000 votes out of over 1 million casts across the state. 1,000 votes. It was exceptionally narrow, and it went days upon end before the primary was actually concluded. Dr. Oz winning that nomination was negative for the GOP on the overall front. As soon as he won the nomination, the polling numbers were not moving in his favor. John Fetterman maintained significant leads because Dr. Oz, quite frankly, was unlikable to the voters in the state of Pennsylvania. Sorry about that. Had to mute myself really quickly. But looking at our numbers now, Dr. Oz has increased support. He has gone from a low of 37% up to 43%, which is an improvement by about 6 points. John Fetterman at his peak was at 51.2% in terms of the overall vote. Dr. Oz again at his peak was actually early on in July when he had about 44% of the vote. Today, he still has not yet to reach those numbers from July, but then again, it was one singular poll that pretty much determined what that overall average was for about a month throughout July and early August. But just looking at the numbers now, what we have seen from the state of Pennsylvania is that it has narrowed up. Regardless of the way that you look at it, the race has become more competitive. But this, again, was entirely expected. I do want to take a look, though, at 2016 and 2010 to see what differences we are finding when it comes down to this polling. Pat Toomey, as the Republican from both elections, had actually been doing quite well when it came down to 2010 polling. On average, Pat Toomey was defeating Joe Sestak by a margin of about 4.5% across the state of Pennsylvania. Ultimately, the margin was about 2 points. Looking at 2016, Katie McGinty maintained about a 2-point lead over Pat Toomey, but Pat Toomey ended up winning by 1.6. That's a swing of about 3.6%, and if you apply that to the numbers now, John Fetterman still wins. But that's not really my concern here. The concern for Dr. Oz is that John Fetterman and Dr. Oz himself have not nearly been in at all a close and competitive race in the way that Pat Toomey and Katie McGinty were in. In the final months of the campaign season, Katie McGinty and Pat Toomey were no larger than 3-point leads over one another. And as we got closer and closer to the Republican Party for a brief period of time, Pat Toomey, being that Republican, maintained a lead of about 1.7% until the final 2 weeks of the campaign season when the Democrats pulled ahead. In terms of the overall average, though, Pat Toomey in May of 2016 maintained a 7-point lead, in June of 2016 maintained an 11-point lead, and overall had a pretty substantial lead over the Democrat when it came down to this race that eventually narrowed up to Pat Toomey only winning by 1.6. If we were to compare this to 2022, we could have made the argument that because Fetterman was leading by 4 and Pat Toomey was leading by 11 at one point, that John Fetterman could realistically win by 13 based off the overall margin shift, but that doesn't make sense, and it isn't fair to do that because we can't treat these elections as the same. But what we can do is look at accuracy of previous polls, look at the competitive nature and the swing overall on election day, because that's when the polls really fell through. There were very few polls in June and July of 2016 for this individual Senate race. You found a lot more closer to the election, the same way you're seeing a lot more right now. And just knowing the state of Pennsylvania, for everything that it is worth, it is a swing state. As much as the Democrats would like Fetterman to be performing to the same level that Shapiro is in the coinciding governor's race, I'd like you to take a look at that as well, which I think helps John Fetterman. Absolutely, with Shapiro leading by about 10 points statewide, this helps John Fetterman. In nearly every single poll that has been released recently, besides the one from Trafalgar, the Democrats lead in the governor's race 10, 11, 15, 12, 10, 11, 11. When you take a look at the polls prior to, John Shapiro was leading by 4, 3, 4, 3, sometimes 10, sometimes 11. But closer and closer to now, the Democrats have started to significantly advance their agenda and advance their ability to win the governor's race, whereas the Senate race is moving in an opposite direction. But this was entirely expected. Taking a look, too, at historical accuracy as well, I want you to look at Morning Call, Gravis, Susquehanna, Monmouth University. Some of them said Katie McGinty was going to win, and some of them say that John Fetterman is also going to win. But one in specific is quite interesting. Morning Call, which has a poll that showed Pat Toomey winning by 1, Morning Call says that Fetterman wins by 5. It really depends on what you choose to trust. It really depends on the pollsters that are polling this race. But on the overall comparison, by that metric alone, John Fetterman is still leading. 2010 had Pat Toomey leading. 2016 had him losing, but not by a lot. And for months, and I mean months, Pat Toomey did lead. At no point in time has Dr. Oz ever led John Fetterman. And the competitive nature of this is just on the fact that this is a Pennsylvania Senate race. This is not New Hampshire. This is not Minnesota. This is not a state that Democrats won by 7 points in the last election. This is a state that President Biden won by 1.2%. And if you want to talk about historical accuracy, Trafalgar said Trump would win by 2. He lost. Insider Advantage said Trump would win by 2. He lost. Susquehanna said Trump would win by 1. He lost. When you take a look at the 2022 data, what does Susquehanna say? They actually say the Democrats are going to win. A poll that historically has underestimated Democratic support is saying, nope, the Democrats are going to win. Trafalgar, the Republican Party's favorite pollster, says Fetterman is going to win. Insider Advantage, the Republican Party's, again, another major pollster, Democrats are going to win. These are things that tell me that the race in itself in the Senate race is still going towards the Democrats. Even though there is a narrowing, Democrats should not look at that and say that it means that they are on track to lose. Dr. Oz, in no reality, was going to get just 37% of the vote. That's why my prediction for Pennsylvania has never moved beyond lean blue, and at different points was red. Think about that for a moment. There were times where I thought Pennsylvania was going red, and that made sense to me, because the Republicans were on track to have a good nominee, but I can't say the same as of right now. And what I take away from this change in characterization, what I take away from this change in rating, what I take away from everything in general from the state of Pennsylvania, is that it was inevitably going to narrow up, and this sudden concern and surge from the Democratic Party is simply unfounded, because they are worried, arguably correctly so, that this race is going to be competitive, but they're worried that these numbers tell them that they are going to lose. Only if this scenario, if Dr. Oz continues to narrow up the polls, that's when you start concerning. But John Fetterman, quite frankly, was never going to get 63% of the vote simply because Republicans were unhappy with their nominee. That was never going to happen, especially in this national political environment. I think about it from the lens of 2018. What happened in 2018? You had an exceptional year for the Democratic Party. What did that translate to when it came down to Pennsylvania? Not 63% of the vote. You can see it here. The Senate race went to the Democrats by 14 points. The governor's race went to the Democrats by 17 points. Even in the Democratic Party's highest year, significantly better than 2022, do you know what happens? Well, you saw what happened. At most, it was a 17-point lead. At most in the Senate, it was a 13-point lead for the Democrats on Election Day. So for Dr. Oz to be in that position where he was once polling at 37% or 39%, we need to be serious about this. We need to, quite frankly, think about this from the perspective of every other swing state. Was this ever a possibility? The answer is no. Was John Fetterman's 10-point victory possible? Maybe immediately following the primary? But at most, that would be 55 to 45. It would never be 48 to 39 and voters voting third party. That never made sense. A lot of these undecided voters were just angry with Dr. Oz and could not convince themselves to vote for him in that instance. But the good news about primaries is that they happen, at least in the case of Pennsylvania, in May, allowing people to finally come to terms with their nominee and back them in the general election. It's the same case that happened with Trump. It's the same case that has happened with many other Republicans and Democrats who came out of hotly contested primaries that ended up winning the general election. Do you truly think that all of the Democrats were super willing to back Biden immediately following that primary? No. It was super contentious, and some people thought that Biden, quite frankly, did not deserve it, that he was too establishment, that it was handed to him through a coordinated effort from the DNC. These arguments that were made were, at the time, reasons to believe that some voters may be turned off about voting for him. But by the time we reached November, Democrats came out in droves, and that's why they won that election. What Democrats need to think about now, when it comes down to the state of Pennsylvania, is yes, the race is competitive. Dr. Oz is self-funding, John Fetterman is raising money, and overall, in terms of the expectations, though, I will say that this narrowing up really hasn't changed much about what we can expect from the state of Pennsylvania. Just looking at the expected chance for John Fetterman, yes, it has reduced. It was at 82, now it's at 77. But think about this too from where we were 4 months ago. In June of 2022, the Democrats had just a 36% chance with Dr. Oz as the nominee already to win this race. And now they're at 77. This race was never going to be a cakewalk for the Democratic Party. It was going to be a victory, and still very much is going to be a victory as of right now. But in no reality was this race ever going to be a super easily winnable race. And the reason that really wasn't exemplified and talked about much by the press was because of these super large polls for John Fetterman. And I take responsibility, for talking about these polls so often, but I never once, and I made this a point too, in a number of my videos to recognize that, hey, yes, John Fetterman is leading by 10. It shows that voters are happy to vote for him and are willing to vote for him, but we cannot expect a 10-point victory, which is why my prediction never had Pennsylvania larger than lean Dem. Larger than lean Dem was a stretch, and that's why it never got there. We recognized and we talked about the fact that our generic ballot in our national environment is significantly less blue than it was 2 years ago, 4 years ago, whatever it might be. But, and there's a but, the Democrats have proven themselves to be very tactful in the state of Pennsylvania, very careful too about what they are doing, whereas the Republicans with Dr. Oz simply have made a mistake. If Sean Parnell was in this race, it would be lean Republican, and I say that with full confidence. John Fetterman is a strong nominee, but no one is strong enough to defy the expectations of a red wave here. And that just might happen. Not simply because of John Fetterman, but also because the Republican Party had such a unique inability across numerous Senate races to nominate the right candidates. And we find that to be true yet again. In the state of Pennsylvania, the race is narrowing, but it's nothing more than what we can expect from a Pennsylvania Senate race. When Dr. Oz starts to lead consistently, that's when I would worry if I was a Democrat. That's when I would look at this and say, oh crap, Fetterman might lose. But right now, he's holding strong. He's maintaining a lead. And I will say that while Democrats can never get complacent, this is not going to be as of right now. If the election was held today, this would not be the most competitive race. And quite frankly, this would probably not be the state that decides the majority for the Democrats or the Republicans, but would play a part in either party reaching that point. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.